The grand ballroom of the Vanguard Hotel shimmered under the weight of crystal chandeliers, their light refracting across champagne flutes and the polished smiles of New York's elite. Elena Mercer stood near the entrance, her emerald green dress clinging to her in elegant folds, her posture flawless, her expression the perfect balance of warmth and restraint. She had spent months orchestrating this evening, their 10th wedding anniversary, ensuring every detail was immaculate. The guest list, the menu, the string quartet playing in the corner, even the way the ice cubes clinked just right in the whiskey glasses. Daniel loved perfection, and so she delivered it. Across the room, her husband held court, his laughter booming as he clapped a hand on the shoulder of some hedge fund manager whose name Elena had already forgotten. Daniel Mercer was a man who commanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of sharp, symmetrical features that made people instinctively trust him. His charm was a weapon, and he wielded it effortlessly. Elena had watched him do it for years. Schmoozing investors, seducing clients, manipulating situations to his advantage. She had always been his silent partner, the one who smoothed the edges of his ambition, the one who ensured his public image remained untarnished. And then he took the microphone. The room quieted, expectant. Daniel flashed his trademark grin, the one that made women lean in and men nod approvingly. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, voice rich with practiced sincerity. 10 years. Can you believe it? A ripple of laughter. 10 years of marriage, of partnership, well, let's be honest, 10 years of me being the one who keeps this train on the tracks. More laughter. Elena's fingers tightened around her wineglass. Then his tone shifted just slightly, enough that those who knew him well would recognize the edge beneath the humor. "But in all seriousness, I should thank my wife for organizing this. Though honestly, it's the most useful she's been in years." A beat of silence. Then laughter. Not the polite kind, but genuine amusement, as if he'd just delivered the punchline of a joke everyone was in on. Elena's face didn't flicker. She had spent a decade perfecting the art of stillness, of giving nothing away. Daniel smirked, pleased with himself, and continued. "You all know how it is. Wives get comfortable. Stop trying. But don't worry, darling." His eyes locked onto hers, mocking. "I keep you around for a reason. Also, let's toast my patient, loyal wife, who almost left me last year, until she realized no one else would fund her Botox and Birkin habit. Darling, your prenup is the only reason you still smile at me." The room erupted. Glasses clinked. Someone wolf whistled. Elena's lips curved into a smile so cold it could have frozen the champagne in their glasses. Later, when the party had dissolved into drunken revelry, when Daniel had slung an arm around the waist of some junior associate from his firm, when the guests had filtered out with knowing glances in her direction, Elena stood alone in their penthouse bedroom, staring at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glittered below her, indifferent. She had known, of course, that Daniel was arrogant. That he took her for granted. That he saw her as an accessory, not an equal. But tonight had been different. Tonight had been a message. A deliberate public humiliation designed to remind her of her place. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Staying at the office. Don't wait up." Elena didn't respond. Instead, she walked to her study, unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk, and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Inside were years of carefully documented secrets. Daniel's offshore accounts, his backroom deals, the names of his mistresses, the lies he'd told to regulators. She had always known this day might come. She flipped to a fresh page and began to write. By the time the sun rose, the first steps of her plan were already in motion. The morning after the anniversary party dawned bright and merciless, sunlight cutting through the penthouse windows like a blade. Elena sat at her vanity, applying her makeup with deliberate precision, a swipe of concealer to mask the faint shadows beneath her eyes, a careful stroke of mascara to darken her lashes, the barest hint of blush to give the illusion of vitality. The face that stared back at her in the mirror was calm, composed. The face of a woman who had not spent the night plotting her husband's destruction. Daniel had not come home. She had expected as much. His text had been curt, devoid of even the pretense of apology, and she had not dignified it with a response. Let him think she was sulking. Let him believe she was wounded. It would make what came next so much sweeter. She dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, professional, unassuming, and slipped her feet into a pair of heels that clicked softly against the marble floors as she made her way to the kitchen. The penthouse was silent, save for the distant hum of the city below. No frantic assistants, no ringing phones, no Daniel barking orders. Just silence. Elena poured herself a cup of black coffee and opened her laptop. She had spent years quietly observing Daniel's business dealings, listening to his late-night phone calls, memorizing the passwords he carelessly left written on sticky notes. She knew which shell companies held his offshore funds, which banks turned a blind eye to irregularities, which clients paid in cash to avoid scrutiny. She had never intended to use this knowledge. Till now. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing accounts, tracing transactions, compiling evidence. Daniel had always been arrogant, but he was not nearly as clever as he believed. His financial empire was a house of cards, held together by luck and the fear he instilled in those who worked for him. It would take only the slightest push to send it all tumbling down. And Elena was more than happy to provide that push. By noon she had drafted a series of anonymous emails, to the SEC, to the IRS, to a particularly dogged financial journalist who had been sniffing around Daniel's dealings for years. The attachments were damning: falsified tax returns, evidence of insider trading, records of bribes paid to regulators. Nothing overt, nothing that would immediately destroy him. Just enough to plant the seeds of doubt. She hesitated for only a moment before hitting send. The response was almost immediate. By that evening, whispers had begun to circulate through the financial district. A sharp-eyed analyst at Bloomberg picked up the thread, publishing a speculative piece about unnamed sources, raising concerns about Mercer Capital's accounting practices. Daniel's phone began to ring incessantly, investors demanding answers, board members requesting emergency meetings. Elena watched from the doorway of his home office as he paced, his face flushed with anger, his tie loosened in a rare show of disarray. "This is bullshit," he snarled into the phone. "Someone's trying to sabotage me." She allowed herself a small, private smile before stepping forward, her expression the picture of concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft. Daniel barely glanced at her. "No, everything is not fucking all right. There's some rumors circulating. Someone's spreading lies." Elena tilted her head, feigning confusion. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that could cost me millions," he snapped. She reached out, resting a hand on his arm. "I'm sure it's nothing," she soothed. "You've faced worse. Remember the media frenzy last year? It blew over in a week." Daniel exhaled sharply, but some of the tension left his shoulders. Yeah, you're right." He squeezed her hand absently, already turning back to his phone. "It's just some asshole trying to rattle me. I'll handle it." Elena nodded, her face the perfect mask of wifely support. Inside she was ice. Phase 1 had begun. Elena stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, watching as the first snow of winter dusted Manhattan in a deceptive layer of purity. The city glittered below her, its beauty belying the cutthroat nature of those who inhabited its highest echelons. She sipped her Darjeeling tea, the delicate china warm against her fingertips, as she mentally reviewed her next move. The financial tremors she'd orchestrated were merely the opening act. Now it was time to dismantle Daniel's most prized possession, his sterling reputation among New York's elite. The annual Whitmore Charity Gala provided the perfect stage. As chair of the events planning committee, Elena had spent months cultivating relationships with the city's most influential socialites. These women, with their razor-sharp smiles and even sharper instincts, would prove invaluable weapons. "Mrs. Mercer," her assistant murmured, entering with a garment bag. "Your dress for tonight." Elena unzipped the bag to reveal a stunning crimson gown. "Perfect," she smiled. "Red for war." That evening, as the symphony tuned their instruments in the ballroom of the Metropolitan Club, Elena made her entrance. All eyes turned to her, the picture of grace, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, the scarlet silk clinging to her curves before cascading to the floor. "Darling." Penelope Whitmore air-kissed her cheeks. "You look ravishing. How are you holding up?" Elena allowed the barest flicker of vulnerability to cross her features. "Oh, one does what one must." The older woman's eyes sharpened. "That business with Daniel's company. And now I hear rumors about that dreadful Henderson girl from his office." Elena's lips parted in feigned surprise. "You've heard about Amanda?" She immediately pressed her lips together as if she'd said too much. Penelope's grip tightened on her champagne flute. I knew it. That man has no decency. Over the next hour, Elena worked the room with surgical precision. A hushed confession to Margaret Van Horn about Daniel's gambling problem. A concerned remark to Olivia Stanton about his unstable temper. Each carefully planted seed took root instantly in the fertile soil of high society gossip. When Daniel arrived, fashionably late and oozing charm, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Where once he'd been greeted with warm handshakes and backslaps, now he received stiff nods and averted gazes. Elena watched from across the room as he approached the Whitmore group, only for the conversation to die abruptly. Penelope actually turned her back on him, the ultimate social snub. His confusion would have been comical if Elena hadn't been so focused on maintaining her mask of quiet dignity. She moved to his side, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Darling, is everything all right?" she murmured. Daniel's jaw clenched. "What the hell is going on? Van Horn just refused to take my call about the museum board position." Elena's eyes widened in perfectly feigned concern. "Oh no. You don't think? Could someone be spreading rumors?" His grip on her wrist bordered on painful. "Find out." As she walked away, Elena allowed herself one small, satisfied smile. The great Daniel Mercer was finally learning what it felt like to be powerless. The coup de grace came during the auction. When Daniel's prized Bordeaux collection came up for bid, the room fell into an icy silence. Not a single paddle rose. The auctioneer's awkward cough echoed through the ballroom. Elena, seated at the front, lifted her paddle with elegant grace. 100,000, she said clearly. The whispers started before the gavel fell. Poor Elena standing by her husband when no one else would. What a saint. That bastard doesn't deserve her. As they left the gala, Daniel's rage was a living thing between them. "This is a fucking disaster," he hissed in the town car. "My reputation is dash." "Shoo," Elena soothed, stroking his cheek with cold fingers. "It's just a rough patch. Everyone has them." But as the car pulled away, her reflection in the darkened window showed a woman who had just won a decisive battle. The financial blows had hurt Daniel's pride. This struck at his soul. And the war was far from over. The scent of jasmine tea curled through the air of Elena's private study as she examined the surveillance photos spread across her desk. Amanda Henderson smiled up at her from the glossy prints, 24 years old, honey blonde, with the lithe body of a former sorority cheerleader and the hungry eyes of a social climber. Daniel's latest assistant. Elena traced a manicured finger along the image of Amanda leaving Daniel's private club at 2:17 a.m., her blouse noticeably misbuttoned. How predictable. She opened her laptop and composed a new email from an encrypted account. Subject: your future. Body: Amanda, we should talk. Daniel will never leave his wife for you no matter what promises he's made. But I can make sure you walk away with more than just regret. The usual cafe. Noon tomorrow. A friend. The next day, Elena watched from across the street as Amanda entered the cafe, nervous glances over her shoulder, fingers drumming the table. She'd chosen a seat facing the door, just as Elena had predicted. Elena waited 15 excruciating minutes before making her entrance. She dressed down for the occasion. Designer jeans, silk blouse, minimal jewelry, the picture of casual wealth. The bell above the door timed softly as she entered. Amanda's face cycled through shock, recognition, then poorly concealed disdain. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise." Elena slid into the chair opposite her. "Let's skip the pleasantries, shall we? You're fucking my husband. I want to help you." Amanda's carefully plucked eyebrows shot up. "I don't know what." "Save it." Elena pulled an envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. "That's 50,000 in cash. There's another 50 when you do exactly as I say." The younger woman's fingers twitched toward the envelope. "What do you want?" Elena smiled. "A performance." 1 week later. The elevator doors slid open to reveal Amanda storming into Mercer Capital's executive suite, tears streaking her mascara. "You liar," she shrieked loud enough for the entire floor to hear. Daniel emerged from his office, face darkening. "Amanda, not here. You told me you loved me." She flung an arm dramatically toward the gawking employees. "You promised you'd leave her." A well-timed sob. And now I'm pregnant. Elena, who'd been quietly observing from a discreet distance, chose that moment to step off the adjacent elevator, a folder of documents clutched to her chest. Her face arranged itself into perfect devastation. The office froze. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Elena, this isn't. Amanda wailed louder. You said she was cold. That she didn't understand you. Elena let a single perfect tear slip down her cheek before turning wordlessly toward the elevators. The symphony of gasps and hurried whispers followed her all the way down. By noon, the video, mysteriously leaked from an anonymous employee's phone, had gone viral. By 3 p.m., Daniel's board had called an emergency meeting. By 5 p.m., Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Transfer cleared. Pleasure doing business. Elena deleted the message and poured herself a martini. The glass was frosty against her palm as she toasted her reflection in the penthouse windows. Phase 3, complete. Elena sat motionless in the dim glow of her study, the only sound the quiet hum of the city 30 floors below and the rhythmic tapping of her fountain pen against a legal pad. The words Mercer Capital LLC v. Securities and Exchange Commission stared back at her in crisp black ink, underlined twice for emphasis. Moonlight caught the edge of the silver letter opener beside her, a wedding gift from Daniel, ironically, as she reached for the manila folder containing her most damning collection of documents yet. She had waited for this moment with the patience of a spider weaving its web. The financial rumors she'd planted, the social ostracization she'd engineered, even the humiliating spectacle with Amanda, all had been leading to this critical juncture. Now it was time to let the system Daniel had so cleverly manipulated for years become the instrument of his undoing. Elena opened her laptop and pulled up the encrypted file she'd labeled Project Atlas. Inside lay the digital equivalent of dynamite, years of carefully compiled evidence. Scanned copies of backdated contracts. Audio recordings of Daniel instructing his CFO to adjust quarterly earnings. A trail of shell company transfers that even his expensive lawyers wouldn't be able to explain away. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't like the anonymous tips she'd sent to journalists or the whispered rumors she'd spread at charity galas. Once she set this in motion, there would be no going back. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. Somewhere in the city, Daniel was likely holed up in some luxury hotel suite, drowning his frustrations in scotch and blaming everyone but himself for his crumbling empire. The thought brought a ghost of a smile to Elena's lips as she attached the files to a new email. 2. AC Whistleblower Hotline. Subject: Evidence of Securities Fraud, Mercer Capital Case Number 4782. She paused, then added a second recipient, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Cho, the rising star in the Southern District's white-collar crime unit who had recently made headlines for taking down 2 other hedge fund managers. The click of the send button echoed in the quiet room. 3 days later, Elena was arranging white roses in the penthouse foyer when the call came. Daniel's voice on the line was uncharacteristically panicked. Elena, listen carefully. Don't come to the office today. Don't answer any calls from numbers you don't recognize. She made her voice waver just slightly. Daniel, what's happening? A muffled curse. The fucking SEC showed up with a warrant. They're seizing computers' files. The line cut abruptly. Elena carefully placed another rose in the vase, adjusting the stems until they formed a perfect spiral. Then she walked to the living room and turned on the financial news. Developing story out of Lower Manhattan where federal agents have executed a surprise raid on Mercer Capital headquarters. Sources tell CNBC the investigation relates to possible securities fraud and... The camera cut to live footage of Daniel storming down the steps of his building, his expensive suit rumpled, face contorted in rage as reporters shouted questions. Behind him, 2 agents carried boxes of documents toward unmarked cars. Elena reached for the remote and turned up the volume. Particularly damaging is the reported existence of recorded conversations between Mercer and senior staff. Legal experts say. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Package delivered. Cho took the bait. Elena deleted the message. Outside, the first snowflakes of a gathering storm began to fall against the windows. She imagined Daniel somewhere in the city, finally beginning to understand the gravity of his situation, the walls closing in. She poured herself a glass of Pinot Noir, the expensive Burgundy Daniel had been saving for a special occasion, and settled in to watch the coverage. The noose was tightening, and Elena held the rope. The penthouse elevator doors slid open to reveal Daniel Mercer for the first time in 72 hours. His custom Brioni suit hung wrinkled on his frame, his normally impeccable jawline shadowed with stubble. The scent of bourbon and stale cigar smoke clung to him like a second skin as he staggered into the foyer. Elena looked up from her novel, marking her page with a silk ribbon. "Darling," she murmured, rising gracefully. "I've been worried." Daniel's bloodshot eyes focused on her with disturbing intensity. "They have recordings, Elena." His voice was raw. "Someone's been feeding them information for years." She allowed her hands to tremble slightly as she took his overcoat. "That's impossible." "Who would?" "By phone," he interrupted, grabbing her wrist. "They have my fucking phone records. Every call. Every text." His grip tightened. "It has to be someone close." Elena made her eyes widen in perfectly feigned alarm. In truth, she'd been preparing for this moment since the night of their anniversary. The small manipulations had started weeks ago. Moving his favorite cufflinks, canceling his gym reservations under his login, having his secretary accidentally forward calls to wrong numbers. Tiny destabilizations to make him question his own mind. Now it was time to escalate. That night, Daniel jerked awake at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of the study door clicking shut. He found Elena at his desk, bathed in the blue glow of his computer screen. "Can't sleep," he rasped. She startled dramatically, quickly closing a browser window. "Just paying bills." Her nervous laugh was too high. "Go back to bed, darling." Daniel didn't miss how her body had blocked the screen. Didn't miss the USB drive she'd palmed into her robe pocket. As he pretended to return to bed, his mind raced. What had she seen? What was she hiding? The seed of doubt took root. Day 14 of the investigation. Elena watched from the breakfast nook as Daniel tore apart his office for the third time that week. "It was right here," he muttered, yanking drawers from his desk. "The offshore account numbers. I had them printed." "Maybe you moved them?" she suggested innocently, sipping her matcha. His head snapped up. "You've been in here." Elena let her cup clatter slightly in its saucer. "Only to dust. You know how the maid struggles with your filing system." Daniel's eyes darted to the shredder in the corner. Elena had carefully placed 3 tiny scraps of paper in the tray last night, just enough to suggest something had been destroyed. When he lunged for the machine, she allowed herself a small, secret smile. Day 21. The bathroom mirror still fogged from his shower. Daniel traced the words someone had finger-written in the condensation. "I know what you did." He whirled, nearly slipping on the marble tiles. "Elena." No answer. Just the distant hum of the elevator descending. When he checked the security feed later, the camera had conveniently glitched during that time window. Day 28. Elena returned from her spa day to find Daniel waiting in the dark, a half-empty bottle of Macallan on the table between them. "Who are you working with?" he demanded, voice gravelly with exhaustion. She set down her bag slowly. "I don't. Don't lie." He slammed his fist down, making the crystal tumblers jump. "The IRS audit. The board vote. Amanda." His wild eyes searched hers. "It's all too fucking convenient." Elena willed tears to well in her eyes. "You're not sleeping. You're not eating." She reached for him. "This investigation has you imagining." He recoiled from her touch like it burned. That night, as Daniel paced the length of their bedroom muttering to himself, Elena pretended to sleep. The cracks were widening. Soon he would be broken beyond repair. And the best part? He'd do most of the damage to himself. The scent of burning documents filled the penthouse study as Elena watched the last piece of damning evidence curl to ash in the marble fireplace. Her fingers trembled, not from guilt, but from the electric anticipation humming through her veins. After months of meticulous planning, the endgame had arrived. Daniel was already at the federal courthouse for his deposition when the courier arrived with the package. Elena accepted the thick manila envelope with steady hands, waiting until the elevator doors closed before slicing it open with her letter opener. Inside lay the one piece of leverage she hadn't anticipated: Daniel's secret Swiss account records, delivered by a whistleblowing banker she'd paid six figures to betray his client. The numbers on the statements made even her pause. $187 million. Nearly triple what she'd uncovered during her initial investigation. Hidden in a labyrinth of shell companies bearing the names of Daniel's various mistresses. The dates went back 12 years, long before their marriage. Elena's lips curled into a razor-thin smile as she reached for her burner phone. Southern District Courthouse, 11:03 a.m. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Cho adjusted her mic in the sterile deposition room. Mr. Mercer, let's return to your Cayman Islands holdings. You testified under oath that. The door burst open. A junior prosecutor rushed to whisper in Cho's ear. Daniel's $5,000 an hour attorney straightened. If this is another fishing expedition. Cho held up a single sheet of paper. We just received authenticated records from Zurcher Cantonal Bank. Her dark eyes locked onto Daniel's. Care to explain why you've been funneling investor funds into an account under A. Henderson since 2018? The blood drained from Daniel's face. Penthouse, 3:47 p.m. Elena was pouring tea when the front door exploded inward. Daniel's tie hung loose around his neck, his pupils dilated with adrenaline and rage. You. He hurled his briefcase across the foyer, sending porcelain shattering against the wall. You did this. Elena deliberately took a sip of Earl Grey before responding. Did what, darling? Those Swiss records only existed in one place. Spittle flew from his lips. My private vault at, he froze. Elena set down her cup with an elegant clink. At the St. Regis? The one you showed me on our 3rd anniversary when you were drunk on Dom Perignon? She tilted her head. What was the code again? Amanda's birthday. Daniel moved faster than she anticipated. His hands closed around her throat, slamming her against the wet bar. Crystal decanters crashed to the floor. You ruin me, he snarled. You ruin yourself. Elena didn't struggle. She'd positioned the security camera perfectly. Just as black spots danced at the edges of her vision, the elevator dinged. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Daniel whirled to find Aise Cho and 3 armed marshals training weapons on his chest. Elena collapsed dramatically to the floor, gasping for air as the hidden bruise makeup around her neck smeared convincingly. Cho helped her up while another agent read Daniel his rights. Elena Mercer, you're material witness number 1 in this prosecution. We'll need your full statement. Over the agent's shoulder, Elena locked eyes with her husband as they slapped cuffs on his wrists. For the first time in their marriage, Daniel Mercer looked at her with something resembling understanding and terror. Elena smoothed her hair and reached for her coat. Of course, counselor, she said sweetly. I have so much to share. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and stale ambition. Elena sat perfectly still in the front row, her black Chanel suit a stark contrast against the pale oak walls as the judge read the verdict. Across the aisle, Daniel sat slumped in his chair, his once impeccable suit hanging loose on his frame, the silver at his temples now overtaking the dark strands of his hair. The months of house arrest had not been kind to him. On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. A murmur rippled through the crowded courtroom. Reporters scrambled for the exits to break the news. Daniel's mother, seated behind him, let out a choked sob. Elena did not react. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Daniel's lawyer placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, but Daniel was staring straight ahead, his eyes locked on some distant point beyond the judge's bench. On the count of tax evasion, we find the defendant guilty. The sentencing would come later, but everyone in the room already knew the numbers. 15 to 20 years. A fine that would strip him of whatever assets remained. A lifetime ban from the financial industry. The gavel fell. It was over. 6 months later. The auction house was packed with New York's elite, circling like vultures as the last of the Mercer estate went up for bid. The penthouse, the Hamptons property, the art collection, all liquidated to pay fines and legal fees. Elena stood near the back, watching as Daniel's prized 1967 Aston Martin sold for a fraction of its worth. Quite the fall from grace, murmured a voice beside her. She turned to find Aise Rachel Cho, now the newly appointed Deputy Attorney General, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Elena accepted one with a gracious nod. Justice was served. Elena said. Cho's smile was knowing. Funny how all those documents just happened to surface at exactly the right time. Elena took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles dance on her tongue. The truth has a way of revealing itself. Across the room, the auctioneer announced the final lot, Daniel's vintage watch collection. Elena set down her glass and raised her paddle. 5,000, she called out. The room stilled. Every head turned. The auctioneer hesitated. Mrs. Mercer, are you certain? She met his gaze evenly. Quite. The gavel fell in her favor. Rikers Island visiting room. Daniel looked older than his 45 years when they brought him out in handcuffs. His orange jumpsuit hung off his shoulders and his hands, once perfectly manicured, were rough and calloused. Elena sat across from him, her posture impeccable, her hands folded neatly on the table between them. She had dressed carefully for this meeting. A simple dove-gray dress, her wedding band conspicuously absent. You look well, she said. Daniel's laugh was hollow. Cut the shit, Elena. You won. What do you want? She reached into her purse and slid a photograph across the table. It showed a sun-drenched villa in the south of France, the Mediterranean glittering in the background. I'm leaving the country, she said. I thought you should hear it from me. Daniel's jaw tightened as he stared at the photo. My money bought that. Our money, she corrected gently. And don't worry, I'll take good care of it. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, was any of it real? Elena considered the question. The early days when his charm had felt genuine. The way he had looked at her across crowded rooms, like she was the only woman in the world. The promises he had whispered against her skin before breaking every single one. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Goodbye, Daniel. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. You'll get yours, Elena. Karma's a bitch. She glanced back over her shoulder, allowing herself one last icy smile. So am I. The end.